Hi everyone, and welcome to the News Agent podcast. I'm Suzy Lycett, Content Manager at Goodlord. Today we're going to be taking a look at all things energy related, or maybe not all things, that would be a very long podcast, but at least having a look at what the energy market may look like in 2023, how energy bills may fluctuate in the coming year. And we'll also be taking a glance at a new report, the Net Zero Review, just to see what's included in that and see how it differs perhaps from previous proposals and recommendations that landlords and agents should be aware of. So a few bits to get through. And I'm once again calling on our resident energy expert and Director of Tenancy Services, Rik Smith, to talk us through. So welcome to the podcast again, Rik.
Thank you, Suzy. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Well, obviously you have joined me a couple of times previously on this podcast. We've talked about the energy crisis before, so we're not going to go into a huge amount of detail on the background of that today. But I will, for those listeners out there who want to listen to that and get a bit more information, I'll include the links in the show notes. But for those that haven't listened to those previous podcasts, Rik, if you wouldn't mind just giving a bit of an introduction of who you are and your background and obviously your expertise and why I'm talking to you about these topics today.
Sure thing. So my name's Rik. I'm the Director of Tenancy Services here at Goodlord. And my background is very much in the energy space, from working for British Gas, setting the price of gas and electricity for UK consumers for 3 years, or whether it's from my time at Uswitch as the energy spokesperson leading on a number of initiatives there, effectively promoting consumer interests and helping them switch and save in the times when switching and saving was a possibility. Very much the energy landscape today is somewhat different.
No, exactly. I think if everybody could switch and save today with the save parts, then I'm sure everybody would be doing it. And so on that topic, let's take a look at the energy market. Obviously, you know, we have been going through quite turbulent times in terms of where energy bills are. The government stepped in and offered various forms of support, especially over the past year. For 2023, there have been some new forecasts out there as to what energy bills are looking like, what energy prices are looking like. So, Rik, if you wouldn't mind perhaps giving a bit of an overview and perhaps some of your predictions as to where you anticipate this going over the coming months.
Sure thing. So let's remind ourselves sort of what has happened in brief up to this point, almost like a previously on type update. So if we go back over 12 months, on the average energy bill was around £1,200. That would be gas and electricity, and that would be for 12 months of spend. But as we have all experienced over the past winter, in particular, if anyone's watching their smart meter readout over the recent cold snap, the average bills today are more like £2,500. And in fact, they were effectively expected to go up much higher, except for the fact that the energy bills have been reduced by the government, almost artificially, effectively saying that this is too much for the UK economy to bear. Too much money from people's budgets would go to paying their energy bill and keeping the lights on and warm, rather than spending on other things that they also need, including food. So this winter, we've seen average energy bills go up to £2,500, which is as a result of the energy price guarantee. And that's effectively the government stepping in and saying, we're going to reduce the price. But they've also handed out £400 on average, £400 to every household. Now, if you're on a prepayment meter, you'd have been receiving those through the post. If you pay by direct debit, some people will have seen that credited to their account. Some people will have seen their direct debits reduced by about £67 a month between the months of October to March. And some will have actually seen the money credited back into their bank account, seen the regular direct debit go out, and then seen, bing, back comes £66 or £67. And then there is additional support for those who are more vulnerable or who are in receipt of benefits. So there has been a whole huge package of measures to help ease the pain of these high costs, both from reducing the price as well as handing money back to consumers. Now, why? Because the wholesale cost of gas and electricity has gone up as a result of fundamentally concerns that there wouldn't be enough gas in the pipes in Europe in order to keep people warm and in order to keep people with the lights on. However, as a result of a large amounts of initiatives that in effect Europe and the UK undertook in the summer, in effect were able to fill up storage in continental Europe and in effect secure a short to medium term supply of gas. Now, that included filling up storage, which is more than just big tanks, end up being effectively underground mines or salt mines, filling those up with gas and making sure that those were filled up before the winter at any cost. So there was a quite substantial cost associated with doing that, as well as securing LNG tankers from across the world to come to European ports to offload that liquefied natural gas, is that LNG. So, quite a Herculean effort to secure supplies for the winter, but also this winter has been relatively mild. Sort of a luck of the draw that there wasn't enormous gas demand during this winter. So that's the picture that we've had. And in fact, the sentiment now is that this winter has been solved. There isn't going to be gas shortages this winter. And as a result, the wholesale markets for gas have gone, well, there's all this gas about, haven't got any real concerns over supply. And so as a result, this balance between supply and demand is effectively going, well, I'm not going to pay a premium for the delivery of that next cubic meter of gas. And so as a result, the prices have fallen. And in the UK, power follows gas is the mantra of the energy trader, which means the price of electricity follows the price of gas because gas is what we use to generate still quite a substantial chunk of electricity. So what does this mean? What does this mean for sort of the near term and future term? Though I can't claim to be the soothsayer of all things prices and all things energy. But what I can do is draw upon the reports that are out there from trusted sources. So, for instance, Cornwall Insight, who've been going for I think nearly 20 years, but have gained quite a good level of profile recently as a result of their forecasts. So they're actually forecasting the underlying energy price cap to go up from April to June to £3,200, with a view that actually it would then start to fall back come July and September to more like £2,200, and then pretty much level off at that through to the end of next year. So again, what we're seeing is the idea that actually prices could stay at their high level, but then begin to soften over in as 2023 evolves. The government have also said that they're going to make the energy price guarantee less generous from April, and so they're talking about letting it float up to about £3,000 in April, and then potentially effectively taking their hands off the tiller from steering and setting those energy prices. And that's part of the government has said this is a very expensive initiative, and one that's costing tens of billions of pounds, and one that they are saying they can no longer afford. Now, one thing we should be looking out for is whether there is a statement from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, either in line with the budget or as part of the spring statement, which is potentially a giveaway. It's quite possible that actually the Chancellor says, I'm being so generous, I'm going to actually retain the £2,500 energy price guarantee that's where we are today, and not let the price go up from April. Now, it sounds very generous and marvelous, but of course, by the time we get to April, May, and June, most of us have switched our heating off, and so actually the cost of doing so is actually potentially very, very modest. And so that, as with most announcements from the Chancellor, there is often a give and a take, give with one hand and take with the other. And in fact, it sounds great, but actually the impact would be very, very modest. So that's the sort of expectation for the year ahead. But the thing to say is that these things are very much subject to change. So the idea that energy bills are softening through 2023 towards the end is all very much dependent upon what we know today. If energy prices, wholesale prices fundamentally change and go in the other direction, then those estimates for what happens later in the year will also rise.
If we were to let's be positive then, let's assume that things will continue on this sort of the downward trend in as much as the prices will start to dip. How do we anticipate this potentially affecting inflation at large? Because obviously the current situation that we find ourselves in, it was exacerbated primarily by these rapidly increasing energy prices. Where do we think there will be, say, at the end of the year into next year in terms of inflation, assuming that these prices do as forecast and potentially start to dip towards the minimum?
Yeah, that's right. So we've got to remember that the measures of inflation are a rate of change. So, and it's always measured compared to this time last year. So to work up an analogy, it's like you're driving along in your car, and your speedometer is basically saying how much you pay for your loaf of bread, for sake of argument. But if you push down on the accelerator, then the price of bread will go up. But if you push down on the accelerator harder, this is inflation, the pushing down on the accelerator, then your speed will go up faster. But ultimately, if you stop pushing down on the accelerator, your price of bread is higher. You're going faster than you were before, but your acceleration has in fact stopped and slowed down. Only in the world where we see negative inflation or deflation do you actually end up slowing down and the price of things going down. So what we are, there is a certain amount of talks highlighting that we are experiencing effectively a price correction, which is a finite period of high inflation before inflation then moves back to where it was. Now, the Bank of England is saying that they're expecting inflation to begin to return to normal in inverted commas there, with a view that actually by 2024 they could be getting back to the sort of 2% target that is their sort of long-term goal. There also is a view that inflation may well have peaked in Q4 2022, so around the October point, when we started moving back from seeing nearly 11-point inflation to more like 10, low 10s, and then 9. So there is data to show that the inflation is softening, but also remembering that it is a compared to last year. Fundamentally, one of the bits of energy price data that I shared with you is that actually bills next winter could be in line with where they are kind of now or slightly lower. And so what that means is comparing next winter to this winter, well, it's about the same. So therefore, that suggests a very, very low inflation rate or even no inflation. Whereas we know that this winter's bills compared to last winter is nearly double. And so that's the sort of the trick of inflation figures, is that it is still compared to last year. So the price correction is likely baked in, but the rate of change of those prices is likely to slow.
So in theory, we should start to see perhaps a little bit more stability, in as much as the prices won't be, they'll still be high, but they won't be increasing quite as rapidly, hopefully giving perhaps, say, salaries time to catch up a little bit maybe. But it does still suggest that perhaps those energy bills, those costs will be quite high for a while to come.
Very much so. And it's the, as I think we talked about before, energy is when I say the lifeblood, but it is a real ingredient in most things that we make and that we do. And so where those energy prices are significantly higher, they will feed into the cost of things that we choose to buy. We've all heard of stories of the local pubs who are struggling with the cost of energy, and they're basically, there's a number of them saying like, look, my energy bill's gone from £5,000 a month, making sure the pub is heated, lit, and the food is well cooked, to something like £20,000. And these are real stories. And where they go, I've got an extra £15,000 to recover. Inevitably, that means the things that they sell are going to cost more, whether it's the pint of beer or whether it's the fish and chips. Like there is little escaping the fact that these costs do end up getting passed on to consumers. And that is what inflation is measuring.
And obviously thinking about our audience today, so, sort of the lettings industry, I'm talking about letting agents, landlords, it sounds like there's sort of almost very little for them to do differently this year. Obviously, that means that their tenants' costs are still going to be staying high. I mean, do you have any advice for landlords, letting agents, or letting agents to pass on to their landlords, perhaps in the current circumstances?
I would. I mean, fundamentally, it is all about open communication about how people are finding the increases in costs for day-to-day goods. So if your tenants are struggling or hinting at the fact they're struggling, or you think they might be struggling, there are a number of sources of help available to them. And so getting that line of communication working is really key and really important. So for instance, energy companies are obliged to be supportive of their consumers if they are struggling to pay. So whether that's about agreeing a payment plan, whether that's changing the way that they pay for their energy, or even whether it's about making, as Octopus Energy have, making electric blankets available to their consumers, because it is cheaper and more effective to heat the body with an electric blanket than it is necessarily to heat the whole house. And so these are just examples of measures that are available to to tenants if they are struggling to pay their bills.
And just a small plug for what we have on NewsAgent. We do have some free downloadable templates for payment plans and things like that, as well as a downloadable sort of info sheet that tenants to share a bit of information about the types of finance and support and so on that may be available to them. So I'll pop those links in the show notes as well. But perhaps just one more question really on this topic of energy. Obviously, as we say, this is a bit of an update, and we have talked about this before on the podcast. But bills inclusive tenancies, that's one of the areas where there's been a bit of an impact with the price of energy going up. Where do you think that this will land? Do you think that this will start to come back in? Obviously, the idea of it does grant some stability to tenants in as much as they at least know what it is that they'll be paying for their energy. Do we think that the demand for that is still there? And do we think that landlords will start to bring that back in and see that as a viable option in the near future? Or do you think that's still quite, perhaps
that's a great question. So we've definitely seen some of the more prominent bills included third parties begin to actually exit the market and generally step back. So Unihomes and Glide are examples of providers out there who've effectively let their customers down almost across the board. And that was actually one of the things that we identified relatively early on, which is a little bit of a plug for Goodlord products here, which is why we introduced an all bills included proposition direct to the tenant. So the tenant is able to take out that proposition as though, actually, I do want a bills package, and that is the price I'm happy to pay. Let's go for it. And we've seen great uptake of that by tenants, and that's because there is that demand exactly to the lines that you talk about. Now, are we going to see the likes of Glide, Unihomes, and their like coming back into the market? I think there is a chance. There's a chance that they try to dust off the old proposition, which I think is slightly worn. But with the calming of the storms in the energy market, it is likely that fixed prices and good fixed prices are likely to come back to the market. Whether those third parties are introducing those or not is another question. But we've definitely seen that it's become a lot less attractive to offer all bills included because of the volatility, because of the rising in energy costs. If that's not factored into the rent that's been agreed, then it's quite possible that the landlord or whoever's managing that bills included tenancy ends up effectively having to make a loss, having to pay out more than they're collecting on the utilities, and that's really not a position they want to be in. But as costs are coming down and are more stable, you'd like to think that becomes a little bit less volatile and potentially more attractive than it has been in the past few months.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's quite a good overview of where we stand currently in terms of the energy market and energy bills and things for and what landlords and agents should be considering for the coming few months. But obviously, in the midst of this energy crisis, it is also a moment where the government has got a number of targets to achieve net zero by 2050. And there has recently been the publication of a net zero review. So former Energy Minister Chris Skidmore, he published this report essentially outlining some recommendations for the government and in terms of what they could consider to help them achieve this target. Obviously, it is quite a big report. We're not going to cover all of the points today, but there are some which I think would obviously affect the lettings industry, landlords, letting agents more than others. So just to sort of dip into that really and just take a look at what it is that's been suggested. One point which I think is obviously it has been proposed previously and it's been reiterated in this report is the idea of rental properties requiring an EPC-C rating by 2025 on all new tenancies, and then that will apply to all tenancies by 2028. What the report highlights is the fact that obviously this isn't legislation as it stands, it is just a proposal. What are your thoughts on whether we think that this will actually come into play, perhaps by these dates? Do we think that this will be pushed back, bearing in mind that it's only a couple of years away, really? And do you think that it would be feasible, really, to for landlords to be looking at upgrading across the board, upgrading all new tenancies to EPC-C by 2025?
Yeah, so I mean, let's try and take this in two parts. I mean, one part of me is going to look at fundamentally the benefits of moving to a more energy efficient home, both from a landlord's perspective as well as from a tenant's perspective. So EPC band C is not best in class. We're talking about EPC A, very much where we are, and actually the average rented home is at EPC D currently. So not enormously far off, but these are averages. There are clearly going to be very drafty cold homes out there that are still being rented, as well as the best in class eco homes at A and above. Research by consulting firm E3G has highlighted that actually the new energy efficiency standards would save renters on average £570 per year if all rented homes were up to band C. And you sort of go, okay, well, what's that about? And the reality there is that it is more cost effective, is cheaper to heat and live in a home that is more efficient, and that is money that is then money in the tenant's pocket. And means that they are more able to, or less likely to default on paying their rent. So you could very much see that improving the quality of the insulation in rented properties helps the landlords make sure they get their rent. That is one way we could be absolutely talking about these. But also, we have seen in this energy crisis that people are very much reducing the amount that they are heating their homes by, and that then has negative consequences potentially for their health as well as for the quality of the property. And so we're talking about damp or really mold as a result of condensation. So poorly heated and ventilated properties end up with black mold and condensation on the walls, which ultimately degrades the quality of the building stock and damages the health of the occupants. Now, there is always a bit of a tussle as to whose responsibility that is. Why isn't it being heated and ventilated appropriately? But then there's also the question as to why is the property so cold? Should the property be getting that cold in the first place if it's heated at an adequate level to begin with? And this comes back to, again, the quality of our building stock in the UK. We very much need, if we look at how we compare to the rest of Europe, as a prime example, the UK is amongst the worst when it comes to the rate at which our houses lose heat. So moving to EPC level C, I think is fundamentally a good thing. It can be achieved with double glazing. It can be achieved with loft insulation. It can be achieved with energy efficient light bulbs. Not all of these measures have to be costly or very expensive. Even making sure that the boiler is a level A or A plus when it comes to the efficiency of the condensing boiler. So there's a lot of things that can be done in a relatively straightforward fashion in order to get to level C. Now, that's all the benefits about why we should do it. And we should, absolutely a consistent and a planned investment in our properties to make sure that they are hitting that standard over time is what we should all be pushing for and supporting and encouraging. Now, on the other hand, we have a piece of legislation that has been talked about, but not delivered. And we are effectively rapidly running out of time for this piece of legislation to come into effect in order to actually have any teeth. It's very much, we're very much in the ambition stage where the government minister comes on the radio and the television and says, our ambition is to deliver X, Y, Z, maybe even ambition to build so many houses for which they consistently miss those ambitions every year. But what we are waiting for is that piece of legislation to bring that into force, and that's not yet present. And there is a view, which I don't want to emphasize too much, there is a view that time has effectively run out to bring that in to be enforceable from 2025. So I wouldn't take that as a free pass, but what I would say is that it's possible that 2025 deadline will slip.
And of course, there are other proposals that the government's put out previously around the use of heat pumps versus gas boilers, and obviously sort of phasing out the use of gas boilers, in fact.
Yeah, this comes back to Skidmore's net zero review. And I think the one thing I do want to say about this is that this has come from so Chris Skidmore, Conservative MP, effectively undertook this net zero review to understand, is net zero a good thing or not for this economy? Now, some of his colleagues were expecting him to go, yeah, this is costing loads of money. Why would we do this? There is always the story of, well, the UK is only 1.5 percentage points of worldwide emissions. Why does it matter what we do when China is out there and America is out there effectively producing over 50% of worldwide emissions? But fundamentally, Chris Skidmore's conclusion was, Net zero is a net benefit to the UK economy because we are already leading the way on offshore wind. And actually, we are beginning to now export that knowledge and experience to other countries, including to the United States, when it comes to, well, how do we do this? Now, we also, 3 years ago, pioneered the first floating wind farm. So this is not a wind farm that's planted on the bottom of the sea, but instead is floating and anchored in place. And that is also more technology that we are exporting across the world. And the UK is also seen as somewhat of a poster child when it comes to disconnecting our carbon emissions as a country from our GDP. So it's very unusual to see a country being able to reduce emissions whilst also grow its economy at the rate that we have done. And so, again, we are a textbook example of how to reduce carbon emissions whilst grow the economy and deliver for the population when it comes to energy needs. The recent price, it's very important that we separate net zero from the recent energy crisis. The current energy crisis has been caused by fossil gas supply. It is not about the cost of running a wind turbine. In fact, the 12 gigawatts of wind that has been effectively signed off in the past 12 months will reduce bills rather than increase bills. There's also stories in the press of the fact that the latest wind farm certifications and licensing that's been issued will return an additional £1 billion per year for 3 years as a result of the fact that those licenses have been sold for electricity generation. So net zero is a net positive. And in fact, Chris Skidmore's recommendations come down to the fact that actually some of these things we should be doing faster, not slower. And one of those prime examples was about gas boilers and the gas boiler phase-out plan, which is the idea that instead of legislating for 2035, we should be encouraging it by 2033. And this is the idea that gas boilers, what you put into that boiler is methane. It's gas that's being pumped from below the sea, and if you burn that, you produce carbon dioxide. There's not really much escaping from that. Other conclusions that are also being drawn is that hydrogen is not the panacea. So yes, you could replace the gas in pipes with hydrogen, and you can then burn that, much like you do methane, but you end up having to replace all of the pipes between where that hydrogen is created and where the boiler is, including in the house. And so this is the other thing. Can we all imagine having to replace the gas pipes in all of our rented properties in order to be able to put hydrogen through them? It'd be enormously expensive and enormously costly. And in fact, some of that cost is already being borne by the UK when it comes to some of the trials that are being run on hydrogen. We also have to go, okay, well, what's the alternative? And one of the alternatives is what's called a heat pump, which is the idea of, in short, you've probably heard this line used before. It's like running a fridge in reverse. A fridge makes the inside cold and the little radiator at the back warm. But what if you switched the other way around and made the outside cold, but the inside warm? Well, there you've got a house being inside and warm and the outside air being made cold. And all it's doing is moving the heat from one place to another. Now, there is an age-old debate which does run on and on, both on social media as well as in the House of Commons and other places, which is about, well, should we do hydrogen or should we do heat pumps? And the reality is that if you've got 1 unit of electricity generated by your wind farm, you can use that 1 unit to create 3 or 4 units of heat in your house, or you could use it to create half a unit of heat generated through hydrogen. So then you go, okay, well, hold on a sec. Well, if I can have half a unit of heat in my house, or I can have 3, surely I'd rather have 3. And that is the point. So one of the fundamental negatives of the hydrogen versus heat pump debate is that fundamentally the science doesn't stack up in favor of hydrogen. You would have to have 6 times more wind turbines or capacity from your wind farms or electricity generation in order to generate enough green hydrogen to compensate for the equivalent when it comes to heat pumps. So it's gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but this is some of the story that Chris Skidmore is also telling, which is around net zero is a net positive and that moving faster is more beneficial than moving slower.
And it's obviously the right time to be having these discussions, really, because if we are looking at changing EPC to C and so on, landlords do need to be considering all of the different factors, all of the potential costs that may be coming their way if these other requirements come in too, rather than considering them obviously in silos. They all sort of align in the same way and are all aiming towards this same goal of making properties more energy efficient and so on. So yeah, it's good to discuss them all in the same space, really.
It is, and maybe I'll just drop in a bit of consumer advice for our listeners. Like, if you are in the position where you're having to replace a gas boiler or upgrade a heating system in any property, whether it's your own or whether it's a rented property, the question you should be asking your plumber is, in effect, to design your heating system so that it is heat pump ready. You may not be buying a heat pump right now, but what you don't want to be doing is investing a load of money now that is in effect unwound. Now, there is this amazing group of heating engineers who do heat pumps, they do gas, they do oil, called Heat Geeks. Now, what I'd encourage you to do is to find, it's at heatgeek.com. These are people who have done extra training to understand and to be able to deliver heating systems that are as efficient as possible. They don't necessarily cost more. They cost less to run, but it is just how the system is configured and set up. Heatgeek.com will help you find a Heat Geek local to you across the UK. There's again, a great bunch of well-trained engineers who know just that little bit extra more to help make sure that the heating systems that are being installed are as efficient and set up for the future as possible.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's obviously, as I say, this report is very much is quite a big document. So there's definitely more that we could discuss. But I think that's probably a good place to stop with that bit of advice for our listeners out there. Thank you once again, Rik, for joining me on this podcast. Very interesting conversation and useful as always.
A pleasure. Thank you, Suzy.